السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Today, inshallah, we're going to be discussing the various views on Mursal. So there's so much to discuss. There are lots of different views. Make dua. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspires me to mention that which is beneficial for you. So we won't be able to cover all of the different views because we only have this one session for this topic. So hopefully, inshallah, we'll encapsulate all the important points or the important views in this one lesson. Allama ibn Hajar rahimahullah says, فإن عرف من عادة التابعي أنه لا يرسل إلا عن ثقة فذهب جمهور المحدثين إلى التوقف لبقاء الاحتمال، وهو أحد قولي أحمد، والثاني وهو قول المالكيين والكوفيين يقبل مطلقا، وقال الشافعي يقبل إن اعتذر بمجيئه من وجه آخر يبين الطريقة الأولى مسندا أو مرسلا ليرجح احتمال كون المحذوف ثقة في نفس الأمر. ونقل أبو بكر الرازي من الحنفية وأبو الوليد الباجي من المالكية أن الراوي إذا كان يرسل عن الثقات وغيرهم لا يقبل مرسله اتفاقا. Now, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah previously mentioned why he is including Mursal Mardud under the category of Mardud. But now he elaborates more on the ruling of a Mursal narration. So the general ruling is that we will not accept a Mursal narration because, as he mentioned, that we don't know the status of the narrator that end, whether it is a tabi'i narrating from another tabi'i or is he narrating from a sahabi, etc. However, what happens if the tabi'i only narrates from reliable narrators? So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah explains the ruling here, and he shows that there were differences among scholars. So he says that you look at, he says, فَإِنْ عُرِفَ مِنْ عَادَةِ التَّابِعِيِّ أَنَّهُ لَا يُرْسِلُ إِلَّا عَنْ ثِقَةٍ, if it is known from the practice of the tabi'i. So this here is important for فَإِنْ عُرِفَ مِنْ عَادَةِ التَّابِعِيِّ, because you won't have many tabi'in telling you that we only, when we drop off a narrator, when we mention something mursalan, then we are dropping off only thiqa narrators, or we will only make irsal when we are not taking the name of a thiqa narrator. Rather, you will have to inspect, you will have to research and see. So once you come to know that it's the practice of the tabi'i, so it's not from a statement of the tabi'i, rather this here is entirely through istiqara. Now this is an important and crucial point to keep in mind, because you will see that this here is actually the preferred view. So the preferred view is going to be that the tabi'i generally, he only makes irsal from thiqa narrators. Now what Ibn Hajar rahimahullah says, he says, فَذَهَبَ جُمْهُورُ الْمُحَدِّثِينَ إِلَى التَّوَقُّفِ, that majority of the muhaddithin, they say that we will make tawaqquf, that we won't accept the narration and we won't reject the narration. So Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah highlights 2 points here. The first, he says, عند زعمه, that it's according to Ibn Hajar's research that he feels that this here is the view of majority of the muhaddithin. Others who have researched this, the practice of the muhaddithin, they have reached a different conclusion. So that's the one point, and we'll elaborate on that. The second point is that all this here is under the chapter of Mardud, under the chapter of rejected narrations. So if the view of majority of the muhaddithin is that we have to make tawaqquf, then it is not correct for Ibn Hajar rahimahullah to even bring this chapter here, because the narration will be rejected. Rather, the narration has the scope of being accepted. ويرد على المصنف أنه حينئذ لا يصح جعله قسما من أقسام المردود القطع على مذهبهم. However, in answer with rahimahullah is that Ibn Hajar rahimahullah did mention on page 51 that on those narrations where you make tawaqquf, then they are equal to mardud. You remember? فإذا توقف عن العمل به صار كالمردود لا لثبوت صفة الرد بل لكونه لم توجد فيه صفته توجب القبول. والله أعلم. He mentioned that on page 51. Then he explains now why do the majority. So according to his view, the majority of the muhaddithin, they would make tawaqquf. Why would they make tawaqquf? He says لبقاء الاحتمال, because the doubt remains. Now, the meaning of this here, there are two possibilities that what doubt remains. So the first is either the doubt which he mentioned in the previous section when talking about mu'allaq narrations, that there if a person has to say that he only makes فإن قال جميع من أحذفه ثقات جاءت مسألة التعديل على الإبهام. So you have that whole مسألة of تعديل على الإبهام. It's either for that reason. So Mullah al-Qari rahmallah then responds on that point which we just mentioned earlier, وهو غير صحيح إذ الكلام مبني على فرض أنه لا يرسل إلا عن ثقة وعلم هذا من دأبه بالتتبع في نقله لا بناء على قوله. That in the case of tabi'in, you are not, if the tabi'i didn't mention, he didn't emphatically say that it's our, he didn't emphatically say that I only would leave out thiqa narrators. Rather, it is after a research. So since there is a research, it's now no more that it could be thiqa according to his view and not thiqa according to others. So this here is the first meaning of لبقاء الاحتمال. Then the second meaning which Allama al-Qani rahmallah explains in Qada al-Watr, he says that he is actually speaking about this doubt which he just spoke about now in the previous paragraph. السبب في بقائه جواز أن يكون الثقة الذي أرسل عنه التابعي روى عن تابعي غير ثقة. That yes, okay, maybe this person here, this tabi'i you found narrator, then that narrator is thiqa. But that thiqa narrator who he leaves out, there's still this possibility that he is leaving out another tabi'i, who in turn is leaving out another tabi'i. Remember, he spoke about all of that. So, that doubt still remains that yes, maybe this particular person who is leaving out is thiqa, but then what about others who could be in the chain? Firstly, we don't even know if there are others, and then if there are, what their status are. So we don't know, and therefore we cannot accept it. Now, we mentioned earlier that this here is just an assumption of Ibn Hajar rahmallah that majority held this view. But what led Ibn Hajar rahmallah to think that majority of the muhaddithin were of this view? So, firstly, maybe he's just following other scholars before him. Allama ibn Salah rahmallah mentioned وَمَا ذَكَّرْنَاهُ مِنْ سُقُوطِ الْاحْتِجَاجِ فِي الْمُرْسَلِ والحكم بضعفه والمذهب الذي استقر عليه آراء جماهير حفاظ الحديث ونقاد الأثر. You can see, so this is what Allama ibn Salah rahmallah said. So maybe he's just following Ibn Salah rahimahullah, that because Ibn Salah rahmallah mentioned it's the view of the majority. And after that, Imam Nawawi rahmallah, in his abridgment, he mentioned the same thing. ثم المرسل حديث ضعيف عند جماهير المحدثين والشافعي وكثير من الفقهاء وأصحاب الأصول. He mentions this in Taqrib wa Taysir. So probably he's just following those other scholars, and where they get this from, they actually get it from the words of Imam Muslim rahimahullah in the introduction to his Sahih. So in the introduction, in the Muqaddamah of Sahih Muslim, Imam Muslim rahimahullah wrote there, وَالْمُرْسَلْ مِنَ الرِّوَايَاتِ فِي أَصْلِ قَوْلِنَا وَقَوْلِ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ بِالْأَخْبَارِ لَيْسَ بِحُجَّةٍ. So you can see he's saying فِي أَصْلِ قَوْلِنَا, meaning that according to muhaddithun, وَقَوْلِ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ. So he's referring to muhaddithin, and he's saying that it's not a hujjah. But now it's very clear that Imam Muslim rahimahullah is not speaking about mursal according to the definition which Ibn Hajar rahimahullah presented. Firstly, look at the context. Imam Muslim rahimahullah brought the sentence in the context of those who rejected a narration because he used the word an, and there is no thubutul liqa. Now, you remember in the previous lesson we explained that scholars of the past, they did not constrict the word mursal, used it in the general meaning of inqita'. So Imam Muslim rahimahullah is also referring to mursal here as a general for general inqita'. And this is an important point to keep in mind, because you will find Ibn Abi Hatim rahimahullah etc. also speaking against mursal, but he wrote an entire kitab on mursal narrations in his Marasil. So when you look in that book, you will find that he brings general narrations with missing links in there. He doesn't restrict it, that it's only when the tabi'i or after the tabi'i is left out. Rather, wherever there is a missing link, he considers that as a mursal narration. So, to use the statement of Imam Muslim rahimahullah would not be correct. Furthermore, we say that Imam Abu Dawud rahimahullah, he clearly explains the view of earlier scholars. So, he wrote a letter to the people of Mecca with regards to his methodology in his Sunan. So, he says in that letter, وَأَمَّا الْمَرَاسِيلِ فَقَدْ كَانَ يَحْتَجُّ بِهَا الْعُلَمَاء فِي مَا مَضَى. So you can see here, he's saying that as for marasil, for mursal narrations, ulama in the past would always use it as a hujjah. He mentions this is published in the Thalatha Rasail or the Tahqiq of Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Qutta. So he mentions that this was the view of scholars of the past. And here when he says كَانَ يَحْتَجُّ بِهَا الْعُلَمَاء فِي مَا مَضَى, in some manuscripts it comes with the words أَكْثَرُ الْعُلَمَاء, that majority of the ulama of the past, they had this, they would use mursal narrations as hujjah. Likewise, Ibn Jarir al-Tabari rahimahullah, he mentions that إن التابعين بأسرهم أجمعوا على قبول المرسل ولم يأتي عنهم إنكاره ولا عن أحد الأئمة بعدهم إلى رأس المئتين. He's saying that all the tabi'in, they agree that you can use mursal narrations are acceptable. And that is, the Hanafis mentioned that is the whole reason why they would make irsal in the first place. If you know that something is wrong, you won't perpetrate it, you won't do it. You will only do it if you know that it is correct. One is your personal opinion. So you are living in that era, and if you are narrating mursalan, if your audience, if they have a problem with it, then they're not going to come sit with you. You won't go study. Example, is teaching something which is incorrect. So if the audience of all these tabi'in, if they had a problem with mursal narrations, they would say, we're not going to go to the durus of that scholar because he only narrates mursalan. But it shows that the teachers also, the tabi'in and the students, all of them, so the general environment in that era was that no one had a problem with mursal narrations. And that is why, in fact, there are so many mursal narrations that one of the reasons which is given that why fuqaha actually accepted mursal narrations is just so that they could have more narrations to work with, because when you have mursal narrations, then you get more ahkam from hadith. Otherwise, on many topics in hadith, you are not even going to have narrations to work with. So therefore, you can see that there were so many mursal narrations, and tabi'in would frequently narrate mursal, and they didn't have a fear of anyone coming and saying, hey, how come you're narrating mursalan? Don't go to the scholar, he only narrates mursalan. Then everyone was fine with mursal narrations. So Ibn Jarir al-Tabari is saying that وَلَمْ يَأْتِ عَنْهُمْ إِنْكَارُوا, no one even refuted those who would make irsal. وَلَا عَنْ أَحَدِ الْأَئِمَّةِ بَعْدَهُم. Likewise, even scholars who came after that, from the Atba'u Tabi'in إلى رأس المئتين, until the year 200 Hijri, and he's referring to Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah. Obviously, there's a whole explanation on that and what he means when he's referring to Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, etc. Hanafis actually make the interpretation, because that's the quality of Hanafis, that we look for good interpretations, but there's no time to discuss all of that. So on another note here to also mention is that Ibn Salah rahimahullah and Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, they, in the previous section we done about mu'allaq narrations, they felt that if Imam Bukhari rahimahullah narrates anything mu'allaqan, then those narrations should definitely be accepted. In وقع الحذف في كتاب والتزمت صحته كالبخاري فما أتى فيه بالجزم دل على أنه ثبت إسناده عنده. But so they accepted it from Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. Yet they have doubts on a tabi'i who spent his whole life for a sahabi, and he was in that period which was really noble, such a pure environment. So they are rejecting his narrations, which he technically, the tabi'i is narrating it mu'allaqan also, because the link above him is being missing. So they accepting the the ta'liqat of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, but they are rejecting the ta'liqat of tabi'in, who generally would make ta'liqat if or narrate mu'allaqan if they are leaving out a sahabi or they are leaving out a thiqa tabi'i. So this year, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah attributed to the muhaddithun, but like we quoted from Tabari and Imam Abu Dawud, it's not the view of the general muhaddithun. Then he mentions the view of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. So he said, وَهُوَ أَحَدُ قَوْلَيْ أَحْمَدٍ, that it's one of the two views of Imam Ahmad. Firstly, here it needs to be verified whether they are really two views of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah or not. Mullah al-Qari rahimahullah said, غَيْرُ الْمَشْهُورَ عَنْهُ. Even if there are two views, the view where he says it must make the waqf, it's not famous. It's like unknown. Likewise, al-Malakani says, al-mashhur anhu muqabiluhu, that the opposite view is more famous from him, that we should accept. So the popular opinion of his is that we should accept Mursal narrations. And this was not a popular opinion of his, and there is a reason why many scholars did not even know about this view. And the reason is simple, is because it did not exist. He only had one view. So there is actually a lengthy discussion on how people started to attribute this view to Imam Ahmad rahimahullah. Very briefly, in that same statement of Imam Abu Dawud rahimahullah, which we quoted earlier from Risala ila Ahli Makkah. So he said, وَأَمَّا الْمَرَاسِلْ فَقَدْ كَانَ يَحْتَجُّ بِهَا الْعُلَمَاء فِي مَا مَضَى. Then he gives some examples. So he says, مثل سفيان الثوري ومالك بن أنس والأوزاعي حتى جاء الشافعي فاتكلم فيها وتابعه على ذلك أحمد بن حنبل وغيره. So he's saying that Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah came فَتَكَلَّمَ فِيهَا, and he began to speak against accepting Mursal narrations, and Imam Ahmad rahimahullah followed him and others. Now bear in mind that Imam Abu Dawud rahimahullah was a very close student to Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, a direct student of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, and he spent lots of time with Imam Ahmad. You get all the questions which he asked Imam Ahmad and the answers, etc. So he obviously would know the view of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah a lot. Now when you keep that in mind, the way Imam Abu Dawud rahimahullah mentioned the view of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, you would assume that Imam Ahmad rejected Mursal narrations. And in fact, there is one of the contemporary scholars who actually uses this here to prove, because he's trying to show that in the Hanbali madhab, you have to reject Mursal narration. So he uses this statement. But we say they don't only look at this statement, look at the very next paragraph. In the very next paragraph, Imam Abu Dawud rahimahullah then said, فَإِذَا لَمْ يَكُنْ مُسْنَدْ ضِدَّ الْمَرَاسِيلِ وَلَمْ يُوجَدِ الْمُسْنَدْ فَالْمُرْسَلْ يَحْتَجُّ بِهِ. That if there is no musnad narration which is contradicting this mursal narration, or there is no musnad narration at all, then he's saying that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, note that I said yahtaju, I didn't read it as yuhtaju, because he's talking of the view of Imam Ahmad. So Imam Ahmad rahimahullah would then accept a mursal narration. So in the absence of a musnad narration, a mursal narration is accepted. That's the view of Imam Ahmad. Now obviously this here is the same view according to the preferred view of Hanafis, because there are other views within the Hanafi madhab as well. But the preferred view according to Hanafis and Malikis is, and also looking at how they implemented this here, is that they only accepted mursal narrations when there were no clear, authentic narrations. Musnad narrations, it means muttasil and marfu' narrations which reach up to Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, but no missing links. Then only they would accept mursal narration. So from this here it becomes very clear that Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, his view, even from what Abu Dawud rahimahullah mentioned, his view is very simple, and his view is very is exactly the same as the Hanafis and the Malikis. Because Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah puts some conditions in it, and that is why you can't read it as yuhtaju bihi and read it rather as yahtaju bihi, because according to Imam Shafi'i, it doesn't mean that only because of the absence of a musnad narration you can practice upon it. Rather, there are a whole lot of conditions which we'll discuss. Then, so that is one scholar from the Hanbali madhab. Then the next scholar in the Hanbali madhab. So when you say next scholar, that means there is no one who spoke about accepting or rejecting mursal narrations until until Abu Ya'la Muhammad bin Hussein al-Farah. He passed away in the year 458 Hijri. So again, when you go through his statements, then a person can easily get confused. He brings a whole chapter on this topic, and he says, Mas'ala al-khabr al-mursal hujja wa yajib al-amal bihi, in his kitab al-udda. So he's saying that this chapter is that mursal is a hujja wa yajib al-amal bihi, and it's essential, it's necessary to make amal on it. But then when you look at what he brings under this chapter, he brings things about munqati' and narrations. So like I told you, there's one contemporary scholar who tries to show the Hanbali madhab is that you should accept that in the Hanbali madhab you should reject mursal narrations. So he then looks at all that which comes in the middle, he dissects it, and he proves from there. He used it to prove. But again, we're not going to go into all of that. On the one hand, you have the scholar who's trying to show that whatever is mentioned in the middle of this paragraph, it shows that mursal is weak. But then you have Majd ibn Taymiyyah, the grandfather of the famous Ibn Taymiyyah. He used this very same paragraph to prove that Abu Ya'la is actually implying that mursal is a hujjah. So instead of going into that whole long explanation to save time, we see that look at his opening statement is that he's saying that Mursal is a hujjah. And then the closing statement of this whole section is وَبِهَذَا قَالَ الْكَرْخِ مِنْ أَصْحَابِ أَبِي حَنِيفَةَ وَمَالِكْ وَالْمُعْتَزِلَةِ. So his opening and his closing paragraph, irrespective of the interpretations which you can give of whatever he mentioned in the middle. And then so he mentions all of that as one view, and then he mentions another view, وَفِيهِ رِوَايَةٌ أُخْرَى لَيْسَ بِحُجَّةٍ. So obviously, if you're mentioning another riwayah, then it has to be different from the first riwayah. So the crux is that the second scholar within the Hanbali madhab who spoke about Mursal narrations also showed that Mursal narrations can be used as a hujjah. Then Ibn al-Jawzi rahmallah, he came and he continuously stresses upon it in his tahqiq, and he always says that al-marasil indana hujjah, al-marasil indana hujjah. So based on all of these statements from scholars who came very early in the Hanbali madhab, the next scholar who came, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali rahmallah. Besides that, we still missed out a few Hanbali scholars, but all of them basically, Ibn Uqayl rahmallah, al-Maqal, Wazani rahmallah, all of them, they said you can't practice on Mursal narrations. So then when Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali came, he said, قَدْ اسْتَدَلَّ كَثِيرٌ مِنَ الْفُقَهَاءِ بِالْمُرْسَلِ وَهُوَ الَّذِي ذَكَرَهُ أَصْحَابُنَا أَنَّهُ الصَّحِيحُ عَنِ الْإِمَامِ أَحْمَدِ. He's saying that many fuqaha have used Mursal narrations, وَهُوَ الَّذِي ذَكَرَهُ أَصْحَابُنَا. And the Hanbali scholars, they also mention أَنَّهُ الصَّحِيحُ. He's not saying أَنَّهُ الْأَصَحُ. He's saying أَنَّهُ الصَّحِيحُ. That this is the correct view. So correct, sahih means that it's the only one view. There's no other view. If there was another view, he would have said asah. But here he's saying أَنَّهُ الصَّحِيحُ عَنِ الْإِمَامِ أَحْمَدِ. He mentions this in his Sharh Ilal al-Tirmidhi. So all this here now we have to talk in a speed and we have to move with lightning because we got limited subjects to conclude this kitab before the end of the year. So all this is, like we're saying, is very basic. There's so much more in the Hanbali madhab. But until here you can see and you can clearly understand that it's incorrect to attribute, like what Ibn Hajar is doing here, to say, وَأَحَدُ قَوْلَيْ أَحْمَدِ, to attribute this to Imam Ahmad rahmallah, because in the Hanbali madhab they only accept Mursal narrations. Thereafter he says, وَثَانِيهِمَا وَهُوَ قَوْلُ الْمَالِكِيِّينَ وَالْكُوفِيِّينَ يُقْبَلُ مُطْلَقًا. So we're saying that the second view is that the view of the Malikis and Kufiyin obviously is referring to Hanafis, that you have to accept Mursal narrations. Now here it is very important to keep in mind the opening words of this paragraph, that Mursal is only accepted if the person who is making irsal, number one, if he himself is reliable, and generally he would only make irsal from reliable narrators. And that is why Ulama Qasim rahmallah objected here. He said, أَوْلَا تَرْكُهُ أَوْ تَأْخِيرُ قَوْلِ الْمَالِكِيِّينَ وَالْكُوفِيِّينَ عَنْ قَوْلِ الشَّافِعِي إِذْ يُوهِمُ الْإِطْلَاقَ أَنَّهُ سَوَاءٌ عُرِفَ ذُكِرَ أَوْ لَا وَيُخَالِفُ مَا عِنْدَ الْكُوفِيِّينَ وَالْمَالِكِيِّينَ. That Malikis and Hanafis are all very strict, that it's only, Mursal will only be accepted if it is proved. The person generally only narrates from thiqa narrators, and we'll explain a bit more on that. The ruling is that the default is that all narrators in that era were generally thiqa. So if you don't know the status of the narrator, you will assume that he's narrating, he lives out as thiqa narrator. He's innocent until proven guilty, you know. So like that, it's a person will have to bring evidence to show that this person, when he made irsal, then he also made irsal from such narrators who are not thiqa. So that is why Ulama Qasim rahmallah said it's better if the author would have rather mentioned this after the view of Imam Shafi'i rahmallah. Although Ulama Laqani rahmallah responded and saying that it's obvious that when he's mentioning this here, هذا الكلام ساقط جدا لا وجه له إذ لا يخاف بعد معرفة أنه خير البحث بمن عرف من عادة من التابعين أنه لا يفصل إلى ثقة أن الإطلاق في كلام العلماء لابد أن يكون في مقابلة التفصيل إما سابق وإما لاحق. That is obvious from his context when he's saying that يقبل مطلقا, then he's referring with this condition. So that is the view of the Malikis and the Hanafi scholars, that if a tabi'i generally narrates from thiqa narrators, then we can accept his mursal narration. So, and then Ibn Hajar rahmallah himself reiterates this point. You can see here he mentions وَقَالَ شَافِعِي يُقْبَلُ, and then after that he mentions again, he brings وَنَقَلَ أبو بكر الرازي من الحنفية وأبو الوليد الباجي من المالكية. أن الراوي إذا كان يرسل عن الثقات وغيرهم لا يقبل مرسله اتفاقا. He brings that to reiterate and to establish his point. So this view is clearly mentioned in the Maliki books, and it's also clearly mentioned in Hanafi fiqh books that if a person, generally his practice, if a tabi'i, his practice was to make a irsal from the thiqa narrators, then we will accept it. If you have to look at the Malikis in the Muqaddamah of Tamheed, so it's printed here with the Khams of Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghutta. ابن عبد البر رحمه الله said أما الإرسال فكل من عرف بالأخذ عن الضعفاء والمسامحة في ذلك لم يحتج بما أرسله تابعيا كان أو من دونه. So basically throughout his muqaddamah continuously he is always stressing that we practice on Mursal narrations, we practice on Mursal narrations, we practice continuously as you go through. So if you got the muqaddamah and if you open it, you will find that from the very first page, that's the point which he is continuously making, that we accept Mursal narrations, it's equal to Musnad narrations. In fact, the very opening words, أما بعد فإني رأيت كل من قصد إلى تخريج ما في موطأ مالك بن أنس من حديث رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قصد بزعمه إلى المسند وأضرب عن المنقطع والمرسل. And thereafter he mentions وتأملت ذلك في كل من تهب. But basically then he says وأسأل مذهب مالك والذي عليه جماعة أصحابنا المالكيين أن مرسل الثقة تجب به الحجة ويلزم به العمل كما يجب بالمسند السواء. So continuously he's mentioning that we practice on Mursal narrations. But now look here, in that what I just quoted, now you can see he clearly said Mursal al-Thiqa. Now he says that فَكُلُّ مَنْ عُرِفَ بِالْأَخْذِ عَنِ الضُّعَفَاءِ, that if a person is known that he takes also from weak narrators, وَالْمُسَامَحَ فِي ذَلِكَ, and he's very lenient on this, then we will not accept his Mursal narrations. So there's here many other Maliki scholars then mention this. Likewise in the Hanafi madhab, you will find that here Ibn Hajar rahmallah is clearly mentioning that al-Majassas al-Razi. So if you look at al-Majassas al-Razi, he mentions the same thing. وَأَيْضًا مَنْ عَلِمْنَا مِنْ حَالِهِ أَنَّهُ يُرْسِلُ الْحَدِيث عَمَّنْ لَا يُثَقُ بِرِوَايَتِهِ وَلَا يُجُوزُ حَمْلُ الْعِلْمِ عَنْهُ فهو غير مقبول المراسيل عندنا. So this here is a very important clause which the Hanafis and the Malikis have put, that it has to be known that a person only makes irsal from thiqa narrators. So from this point here, it is clarified that even though Ibn Hajar rahmallah brought Mursal under the topic all madhahib, and that is what Mullah al-Qari says, فَيُرَدَّ عَلَى الْمُصَنِّفَ أَنَّهُ لَا يَصِحُ جَعَلُهُ قِسْمًا مِنَ الْمَرْدُودِ بَنَاءً عَلَى جَمِيعِ الْمَذَاهِب, because majority of the Mursal narrations, it was supposed to be under Maqbul. Ibn Hajar rahmallah then brings the view of his Imam last. So he brings the view of Imam Shafi'i rahmallah, and he says وَقَالَ شَافِعِي يُقْبَلُ إِنْ اعْتَذَرَ بِمَجِيئِهِ مِنْ وَجْهٍ آخَر. Why he brings the Shafi'i view last when he himself is a Shafi'i? This here is to subtly denote that his focus here is centered around Ḥadīth. He's not discussing this from a fiqh perspective. So therefore, in a first sentence, he first brought فَذَهَبَ جُمْهُورُ الْمُحَدِّثِينَ, and now he brings the Shafi'i view. So he brings, and then he says, يُبَيِّنُ الطَّرِيقَ الْأُولَى. Now this word here, يُبَيِّنُ الطَّرِيقَ الْأُولَى, Mullah al-Qari rahmallah says that in some nuskhas it comes as يُبَيِّنُ الطَّرِيقَ الْأَوَّل, and in some it comes in the word أُولَى, while the أَنَّ الطَّرِيقِ يُؤَنَّث وَيُذَكَّرُ, it could be mu'annath and it could be mudhakkar. So he mentions the Shafi'i view, but he mentions it in a very concise manner, that Imam Shafi'i rahmallah would accept Mursal narration, but if few conditions were fulfilled. So inshallah we'll discuss this. We're hoping to finish it, but now I need to rush somewhere, so we won't be able to discuss it now. Inshallah we'll discuss it on Thursday. Until then, jazakumullah khairan.